welcome back to the Brown Boy Podcast.
We haven't clapped.
Oh shit. Okay.
How tired are you?
Quite tired, clearly.
Okay.
I'm really tired, okay? Okay.
3, 2, 1. Okay.
Right.
Should I do it?
So, yeah, go on.
Okay. So, welcome back to the Brown Boy Podcast. Danush, as we can see, clearly isn't up to it today. But we're going to put him through the ringer. The last episode, obviously I wasn't there, but I thought it was quite fascinating. Like, that's probably one of the best episodes we've done. So thank you to Omar and Hamza for that. Obviously they're both like theology beasts, so that was really interesting, and hopefully we can have them on again at some point. Today, I did have some thoughts on the episode, which I'll bring up maybe at some point if we have time. But today, I have some really interesting stuff, and it's to do with biology. And it interested me because I was like, wow, suddenly I'm interested in biology, because I've never been interested in biology before. But you will like this as well. And it's to do with, I'm reading this book called The Forces of Nature by Professor Brian Cox, who's done, if you've seen BBC documentaries like maybe 4 or 5 years ago, he used to do a couple of those, which are really fascinating. And I used to watch them. And so I was reading this book, and it's about sort of like the fundamental forces of the universe. So how is the universe built from the ground up? And it's full of interesting things and interesting facts. It's
the 4 fundamental ones.
Yeah, so you explore quantum theory and the 4 fundamental forces and sort of like elemental physics, and it's split into 4 sections. So the 4 sections are symmetry, motion, elements, and color. So symmetry is about the symmetry of the universe. Every now and again you get like a very interesting fact. So in this one it was why snowflakes are hexagons, and why, like you were talking about in that like older episode about like preferable structures and shapes. So hexagons and the 3D version of a hexagon. Don't know what that is.
A hexagonal prism.
No, not a hexagonal prism, but there's like imagine like the 3D version of a square is a cube, but imagine
it
the
carries
3D
on,
version.
like,
yeah,
so almost like a polygonal
hexagon.
sphere. A polygonal sphere.
Yeah, like that.
Okay.
Motion is about special relativity. So it explained how we went from Newtonian laws of physics, which we still use today, which are amazing, but how Einstein rebuilt physics from the ground up in sort of about 100 years ago. And then we get to elements, which I thought would be boring, and it's about the moth and the flame. So the thing with the moth and the flame is the moth is obviously like a living creature, and it's made up of living matter that when it comes together is living. But a flame, and a moth also uses respiration to like keep it going, right, to create energy and whatnot. A flame does the same thing. Like it has redox reactions, and it creates energy and creates heat. So what is the difference between a moth and a flame?
One's living, one's not.
Exactly, but why? Why is the flame living, and why is the moth living? Why is the flame like not living?
Well, as much as English literature likes to personify fire, saying, "Oh yes, it's angry, the angry flame," or the, you know what I'm talking about. In biology, like we learn in like year 3 or year 4, you follow the Mrs. Gren sort of rules.
Yeah.
So we have, let me try to think, I can't remember this. So we have movement, respiration, as for sensitivity, growth. Second R is for reproduction, E for excretion, N for nutrition. I don't know.
Yeah,
but yeah, they have to follow.
Yeah, basically, like, there are certain classifications that we have for something that's living, something that's dead. But the chapter kind of explores, like, can we really consider this as, like, is there really a difference between living matter and dead matter? Why do we consider living matter and living things to be so special? And then it goes on to talk about natural selection. So obviously, like, that's the process by which living things develop and change and become more complex. So if we're going to find the origin of life, not even necessarily on Earth, but if we're going to find the origin of life in the universe, we have to trace back life, and that means tracing back through the process of natural selection. So one of the theories about how life started on Earth okay, let's explore this, actually, because obviously I know the answer, but it'll be interesting for you to think through it too. So if we trace back natural selection, what would eventually happen to all the species? Like, obviously nowadays we've got millions and billions and trillions of different animals and species and everything living on Earth. What would happen if you, like, wound back the clock?
So what are the first ones, basically?
Not even necessarily the first ones, but what is the first one? Like, what would happen if you, like, kept moving back in natural selection?
So there's actually nothing on the land, so we go back down to the fishes first.
Yeah.
The fishes go back to very, very small microorganisms, but the microorganisms, if you link it back to, it's a microbe is a cell. The cell, the reason why it can respire is due to it's what's believed, the theory is believed to be the endosymbiosis, some type of symbiosis between a eukaryotic, or it was basically a bigger cell, and the smaller cell was a prokaryote, but it was adapted to make ACP. So basically what happened was, through this endosymbiosis, the bacterium, which is basically a mitochondrion, was basically engulfed, the big cell engulfed it, and what happened was that it now just became a mitochondrion, and then as they replicated, somehow some type of symbiosis happened. By the way, this is a theory, we don't know if it's correct.
Yeah.
It's what's widely accepted.
Yeah.
But then, you can trace it back further and say, how did this stupid animal, like, how did this microbe...
Yeah, where did it come from? So
where that came from.
One of the sort of, like, rules that people used to consider when they would when religion was kind of the backing of everything, was that you can only make life from other life forms. Alright, so something that's living can only come from something else that was living, whether it's giving birth or reproduction, or if it's evolution or anything. Living things can only come from other living things. And so if you trace that back, there has to be a point at which someone breathed life into it, right? Or something happened where life... Yeah, so obviously that goes into a creator, a designer, etc.
Or it goes into, somehow, through evolution of certain molecular compounds, we have formed a certain thing. Let's say it's a very basic bacterium and stuff. That's fine. Technically, because Mrs. Gren says that reproduction is possible, the frame of logic, what it forms is that something living, as you said earlier, gives life to something else. Therefore, the fact that something living came out of chance due to some sort of arrangement of certain molecules, because there's a bilayer can be formed, and the way this sort of organism, the first sort of microbe, can act in such a way, allowed it to be classified as a living thing, that has not been born from something that's already been reproduced. So even though that first animal, basically the first animal is considered as a living thing, the first microbe, whatever it is, but it doesn't necessarily conform to Mrs. Gren, because it hasn't been, I can't explain it, but do you get what I'm saying? Because it's not been reproduced into crap.
So it didn't. So it breaks this law. I think what you're saying is that it breaks this law. You need, at some point, you need to create something that's living out of dead matter.
Exactly, that's what I'm saying. So if everything has come from this one organism, technically we are all not living.
Well, But we are living.
We
But
are, but
clearly, like, the distinction between living matter and dead matter is kind of like it's a bit shaken up now.
yeah.
Yeah, because like we all did come from dead matter. Like dead matter not being something that died, it's just matter that was not living. Like it was just chemical compounds. So you're exactly right. The existing theory, the one that Darwin came up with, and his predecessors around that time, even before natural selection was theorized, in Origin of Species, like people were still considering where could you have made life? How could you have made life? And so the existing theory was that somewhere on Earth there was like a pool. We know it obviously comes from water. There was a pool or like some water somewhere, and it was just full of in the early atmosphere. It was ammonia, and there was very little oxygen, and there was all these different chemical compounds, and with some kind of you could call it an activation energy. With some kind of activation energy, whether it was like a lightning strike or whether it was like UV radiation or whatever it is, these compounds sort of came together and somehow formed the first living creature.
Components of a first living creature, I'd say. For example, nitrogenous bases.
Yeah, this is the interesting thing. You're right. You can make bases. And yes, you can make amino acids and stuff because someone did this. It was at the same time that they discovered the structure of DNA, but this is the experiment that happened at the same time, and this got a lot more media attention at the time. But since then, it sort of like died out. Essentially, what they did, I've forgotten the names of the people, but they basically had this controlled experiment where they'd have like a dome, and they'd have like a little pool of essentially what in the thing it's called like a little pool of warm sludge, because out of that the first sort of like living creature came. So they had this pool of warm sludge with the atmosphere of the early atmosphere, and they struck it with like lightning bolts, and then they would move it to like cold water so they can extract whatever was in there. They hoped to find obviously you wouldn't hope to find immediately bacteria, because then you've just created life. But and that would obviously we'd know about that. But instead of that, they found amino acids and the bases and whatever you talk. They found the components of bacteria. So clearly something's working, right? So it got people like really excited. Like it's almost like you're Frankensteining a bacteria together. Like you've got these dead compounds or like non-living compounds, and then you're like electrocuting them, and you're giving them enough energy to come together and by random chance form some more complex living structure. And like living things are the most complex, we can call it the most complex structures that we know of today, because like living things are amazing, and there are like nothing else in the universe, and we'll come to that because that's important. So at this point people were like, okay, well here we are. Like if this sort of like process continued, we'd be able to create living things, right? But there's a problem with this. Do you know the second law of thermodynamics? You will have heard of it.
What,
but
the
I'm just
energy
saying.
Can't be made.
No, not that one. No, it's the entropy one.
The entropy one. Well, it only leads to his disorder or something.
Yeah. So an entropy, so higher entropy means it's more random, I think, right?
So you're saying that there is all this stuff coming together to form some organism. It's not actually becoming more disordered, but more ordered.
Yeah. So
yeah, but then again, like that's the thing. I've heard this before. Like in terms of evolution, actually, evolution is getting more disordered. No, it's not even evolution. It's
no, you're right. Well, evolution gets more ordered. Oh, kind of. Yeah. Okay, carry on. Yeah.
It's like this. It's very difficult to sort of classify what disorder is, because one way to think of evolution is that stuff's happening, and out of certain and stuff splitting up to form a more competitive sort of advantaged species. That's
Mhm.
basically what evolution is. You can look at it as being ordered, or you can look at all these billions of different animals coming from this one microorganism can also be looked at disorder, for example. But if you look at humans, for example, one, it can be observed that look, our population is rising to like 7-8 billion. Look at this disorder, like it works. But another way you can think of it is that there can be other means of us to create disorder, which may still look like it's ordered. Certain way we emit radiation, for example, or certain ways that we do things that can cause some
More
form of
disorder.
mathematical disorder, even though to us it looks like it's ordered because
No.
we just big floating things around, you know.
You're right. You spoiled the whole thing, but you're
Did I
right.
really?
Keep that to yourself. Ooh.
Okay.
Well, I mean, everyone's heard it now, but keep that
Go
to
on.
yourself for now. So, somehow, well, when you think about it, if you're in the sludge, we're going back to the sludge. If you're in the sludge, if a living organism is obviously a very structured, very ordered thing, even if it's whether it's a human or if it's bacteria or whatever it is, the measure of entropy is sort of like it's a measure of how many ways you can like rearrange something. If you can rearrange it lots of different ways, or if you can rearrange it lots of different ways and it still works, then it's very disordered because there isn't a specific order in how you do it. But if you had a living organism, or if you had a human, humans are made up of, I don't know what they're made up of. I know there's silicon or something. They're made of stuff.
There's no silicon in it. What the?
No, humans are made of silicon.
What's
There's a portion of silicon in us. There's also there's iron, obviously. There's ammonia,
There's sulfur.
bunch of stuff.
There's sulfur.
sulfur. Oh, maybe I was looking at sulfur. No, silicon's Si. Yeah, no, silicon.
Okay.
But yeah, no. If you have the constituent atoms of a human, and you like shook them up, the chances that you'd end up with another human is very low, right? This means that humans or living things are very ordered. But if you're in the sludge, the second law of thermodynamics, we don't actually explain it. Second law of thermodynamics, which is the fundamental law of everything, is that entropy can never go down, which means you can never head from something that's you can like everything basically tends to disorder. Yeah. So if you're in the sludge, the atoms are going around everywhere. Even if you strike it with lightning, whatever you do to it, you're never going to get something that's more ordered from something that was originally had less order, right? Because a living thing is something that has more order than its surroundings, but you're not going to get that because that goes against the law of thermodynamics.
Okay.
So, without spoiling it, how do living things then exist? Because if the existence of living things means that particles are tending from disorder into more order, how does it work? You're right, actually.
Is it just order in one aspect but disorder in many other aspects?
Yes.
Okay.
So,
Sorry for ruining it.
no, it's fine. I mean, you're very smart. So,
Go on. I still like only get like a quarter of the picture. Keep going.
So, you're right. If you have a reaction to create, how do you create water? Explain how you create water. I don't really know.
How to flip? I can't even answer that question. You can't really. The flip. Okay. How about you have 2 protons, and a O minus, and 2 electrons.
Yeah, so you have 2 hydrogen atoms.
Yeah.
Yeah.
2 electrons and then O minus ion. O2 minus ion. Yeah.
Yeah. So, like, oxygen's very reactive, but the existence of water is actually, it's a very ordered way of those particles to exist. I don't know why, they just said it was. But when you create water, it's an exothermic reaction. which means that, like you said, radiation is being emitted, heat is being emitted, which means that the area, like if two hydrogen atoms and an oxygen atom were coming together to form water, their surroundings would then have higher entropy, because their surroundings are going to gain more energy and they're going to become more random. So this doesn't break the law of thermodynamics. Living things use respiration and photosynthesis. Actually, I don't know about photosynthesis, but respiration is an exothermic reaction, right? Right? Because I don't know, I didn't study biology.
Yeah, it releases energy, yeah.
Yeah, so it's an exothermic reaction. So, actually, when you release that energy, you are allowing your existence. Yeah, you're allowing your existence when you release that energy, because when you exist, you're breaking the law of thermodynamics, but in the grand scheme of things, when you release that radiation, your surroundings are getting more excited, and your atoms, the atoms and the particles surrounding you are getting more excited. And so, as a whole, as an entire system, your living creature is actually sort of like, it's paying its dues back to the second law of thermodynamics. So the disorder that you create actually allows you to exist as an ordered system, which it just blew my mind, because it's like, it's just mad. It's crazy, because our very existence is based on the fact that we can create disorder in order to allow ourselves to exist. So
that's quite poetic, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, that would have been a nice end, but I've got more.
Come on.
But yeah, that's like, and so what you're doing essentially when you when the universe ends,
Sure.
like obviously the stars are gonna burn and the everything's gonna, like, you're not gonna have any more light. Like, the universe is gonna be black. Everything's gonna be black. There's gonna be like radiation, and black holes are gonna eat everything up. It's called the heat death of the universe. So what we're essentially doing as living creatures is
does it get hot or cold? Well, it doesn't get anything, it just stays like it, doesn't it?
Well, I mean, it's a zero-sum game. So some things will get hot whilst other things have to get cold.
Okay, cool, go on.
But yes, so as living things, essentially what we're doing is we're accelerating the heat death of the universe just to exist as ourselves, because we're emitting more heat, and that means particles getting more heat, everything's getting hotter, which means that we're heading faster towards the heat death of the universe. So our very
Okay, hold on, let me bring something in now.
Okay.
Could it be that the rarity of life in the universe is there so that this acceleration process isn't too accelerated, if you get what I'm saying? Do you think there's some type of tendency to lean away from this acceleration, meaning that because life, which is such a big factor that can accelerate the heat death of the universe, due to its effect on the entropy, do you think if it has that effect on the heat death of the universe, there can be some type of tendency for life to be unfavored in other parts of the universe and stuff? Is that why we haven't really properly met aliens or something? Is that why we haven't found life yet properly?
Why? Because it's difficult for things to create more disorder.
No, because I'm trying to link it to the heat death. So how disorder is being accelerated, maybe there's some type of tendency that tries to stop it by limiting the amount of life there is.
Right. So I don't know where to go with that.
I don't know. You carry on with what you were saying earlier. I was just thinking.
Oh yeah, no, maybe there is a limit towards the rate at which you can accelerate the heat death. Is that what you're saying? So that's why it's difficult for living things to exist.
More or less, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it might be true.
I'm making up science.
That's what this is all about.
Exactly.
So,
what were you saying earlier?
I was in the middle of a sentence. Basically, in order to exist, we're helping the universe end. So our very existence is helping the end of the universe, which is lovely. It's not nihilistic at all.
Well,
so, what do you think?
I never thought of it.
Well, I mean, it's a very lengthy chain of like reasoning, but technically it's true, and I mean, there's nothing more you can really add to that. It is what it is. I just think it's very interesting how there has to be some kind of balance between order and disorder in everything. I mean, it's a fundamental law of physics and everything. There's a quote which is that if you can disprove the theory of evolution, that's fine. If you can disprove Newtonian mechanics or Einstein's general and special relativity, that's fine. But if you break the second law of thermodynamics, then you are fucked. Like you might as well just bow down and let things just take it. You've got nothing. There's nothing more you could do. Which, I mean, it goes to show, like, this is, I don't know, yeah.
We don't actually do the rules of thermodynamics in chemistry for some reason. We have a whole topic called thermodynamics, but we never go through the rules of it.
Yeah, the laws of thermodynamics, which are, it's strange because they're literally the most fundamental laws of the universe. Like, I'd never learnt about them. Like, I do physics and I never learnt about them. You do chemistry and biology, you never learnt about them either.
Never learnt about this, yeah.
So, like, I think
we finished the spec. Oh, we finished the spec.
In what?
Everything, more or less. We have a few more lessons and that's it.
Yeah, I mean, we're just revising at this point, isn't it? It's not very fun. I don't know.
Yeah, while the universe is killing us off by keeping us alive.
Exactly. But we're killing the universe. It's lovely. Do you want to go into something a lot nicer? It's again from this book, but it's about ATP. You mentioned ATP. Do you know how ATP is produced? Like, obviously you do know because you do biology, but how is it produced?
So, should I explain it in very simple terms?
No, go as in-depth as you know.
Okay, so, our product is ATP, but our reactant is glucose. Yes. Glucose becomes a bunch of stuff. And, hold on. Focus. Okay. Sorry.
Yes.
Never mind. Got an hour and that. Okay, whatever. So, ATP. Shit. Okay, so glucose split into pyruvate in the cytoplasm. The pyruvate is diffused. Basically, glucose splits up into half. Imagine this 3-carbon molecule. Yeah, it gets transported into the mitochondrion, which is where ATP is made. In the mitochondrion, what happens is that the 3-carbon molecule has a bunch of phosphate groups put on it. Phosphate groups make it more reactive. And that results in making pyruvate. Wait, I just said that it has to be pyruvate. It's called glycolysis, where this one is the only sort of process of respiration that occurs in the cytoplasm. But then, we have pyruvate, which is imagine glucose. In the cytoplasm, you have a bunch of phosphate groups, attaches to glucose, splits out 3-carbon molecule, pyruvate, gets transported into the mitochondria. That's where I was. Yeah, cool. Now, Link's reaction. One of the carbons goes away, becomes carbon dioxide. Yeah. And another sort of component is added onto it called acetyl coenzyme. You don't need to know what that is. It's an enzyme. It becomes acetyl CoA, or acetyl coenzyme A, is its full name. That joins the Krebs cycle reaction, where oxaloacetate binds to it, it creates a 6-carbon citrate molecule. Throughout all of this, what is really, really important for you to understand how ATP is made is that there are certain coenzymes that are sort of reduced. There you go. There are certain coenzymes get some protons and some electrons in the midst of all these reactions, as a form of these reactions happening. For example, when the decarboxylation of the pyruvate, the 3-carbon molecule, occurs, when the carbon dioxide just flips off as soon as the pyruvate enters the mitochondrion, part of the reaction is this coenzyme called NAD gets reduced into reduced NAD.
Yeah.
This happens a bunch in the Krebs cycle. This happens a bunch in the cytoplasm. Now imagine you have a bunch of these coenzymes, and they all have this reduction potential because they have these protons and these electrons. Now, on the membrane, or on the inner membrane of the mitochondrion, imagine there's like a sheet. There's a bunch of different sort of proteins on the sheet. These coenzymes get oxidized again to release these protons and these electrons.
Yeah.
So the job of the coenzymes is to bring all these protons and the electrons to the inner membrane. Yeah?
Yeah.
So now we've got electrons, we've got protons. Now let's start making some ATP. So, before we even start, the sort of subcomponents of ATP is that there's ADP and there's phosphate groups. Phosphate groups, it's a phosphate group, they're everywhere. ADP is adenine as a base that occurs naturally, I'm guessing, or maybe it's synthesized somewhere, I don't know. There's just loads of it somewhere. And you have, phosphate groups again, that's what ADP is. Now, what happens is the electrons that the coenzymes have brought, they go through this cycle of these proteins. They keep going around this chain, basically.
Yeah.
And they're brought to the end somewhere. That doesn't matter. But while these are going down energy levels, these electrons, as they're going through the chain, they go down energy levels. The energy is used to transport these protons outside the inner membrane into the intermembranous space. There's a space where protons go into. Now what happens is there's now an electropotential gradient because there's a bunch of H+ ions just hanging around the intermembranous space.
Yeah.
And the way this works now is that all these protons are going to go down via diffusion through this enzyme in the inner membrane, the ATP synthase, and that catalyzes the sort of conversion of ATP into ADP. And the way that protein works looks so robotic, it's nuts. Like you can go like look up a GIF. Like I don't know if we can attach it onto the video or something. That protein is so nuts. Like the way it's like a factory. It's like a you know how cars are made, a production line.
Yeah.
That's how it looks. That's how it does stuff. It's weird because it's weird.
Yeah,
it's weird. It's weird.
It's strange, but yeah. Are you done?
I'm done.
Okay. Yes, you're absolutely right. And that was I was basically going to explain. Well, not I didn't know about enzymes, but yeah, that's how ATP is made. The part that I find interesting is the physics of it. Essentially, what the electrons are doing once they're going along these chains is they're pumping the protons up, and when you have an electric field, and the protons have to go down that potential gradient. So it's almost like you're pushing up the protons and then they come back down, and you're pushing up and you come back down, and this is sort of like it's like an energy cycle, and what does that do?
So the protons, they go down via ATP synthase down the electropotential gradient.
Yeah.
The energy from these sort of protons, imagine that, imagine a hydroelectric turbine. The water are the H+ ions.
Yeah.
And they sort of spin the turbine, which is ATP synthase, and it pushes out electricity, which is the ATP.
Yeah.
That's actually a perfect analogy. I'm so proud.
That is, and that's literally it. You know what's fascinating about this is that if you're trying to find the origin of life, the one fundamental thing that all living creatures have, or as far as I know, the one fundamental thing that all living creatures have is the storage of energy in ATP, right? So whether it's bacteria, or whether it's humans, or whether it's an elephant, or dinosaurs, as far as we know, like everything uses the energy storage of ATP. So if we go back, and it's like it's basically like a it's like a hydroelectric turbine. Like you push it and then it comes back down and then you create your energy and then you can do stuff with that energy. So it's like this is the energy source of life. This is the energy source of everything, or everything that lives. And so we can use this now. We can use this because like if we go back to the sludge, what is the sludge? The first living microorganism. Actually, we disproved the sludge, but the first living microorganism.
Yeah.
Like it, if you think about it, due to natural selection and everything, like even if natural selection went on for 100 million years, wait, did it? No, it did. It went on for 4 billion years. But like if every living creature today has that characteristic, it means that at some point, that first living organism also had that characteristic. Right. So, like it's. I have so many thoughts in my brain. It's like this is the evidence that we have of the first living, like that proves the existence, or it's the first characteristic we know of the first living organism. Or we know for a fact, well, not necessarily for a fact, but we know to a very high degree of likelihood that it had this characteristic of energy storage using ATP. And we know how ATP works. So if we know how ATP works, we can figure out how this organism was created, right? So, like you mentioned, the way that the source of energy, the source of potential, is the protons being at that higher potential and going down the potential gradients, like the electric potential gradient, right? So that's like, if this is the source of how like life works, how can we then, like, what's the first step towards creating that naturally? Because obviously when you're living, you start doing that immediately. But the first living creature, like we said, life had to at some point be created out of non-living matter. So how could you have like created this potential naturally? That's essentially what the question is to the beginning of life, right? So like, where can we find this natural potential of protons and protons going down that potential gradient, and then having the chemistry, the biochemistry essentially of all these other complex structures coming together, and that's basically how you would create life. So, how do we do it?
So you're asking me, okay, so you just asked me the big question then.
Yeah, you'll know though.
I know, like I can imagine it. There's shapes like floating around my head. If I look into the sky right now, I see different compounds somehow being phosphorylated, dephosphorylated, creating different gradients and different molecules that can perhaps sort of almost mimic how a job of a mitochondrion is, for example. All these basically, so there's, imagine you have a bunch of very complex molecules that are being made following the entropy sort of laws that
it's an exothermic reaction.
It's an exothermic reaction. They, like, obviously it's not going to be the same molecules. It's going to be something similar. The reason why everyone has these molecules now is via evolution. Like, these are the ones that work. They don't have to be the same molecules. But imagine some of these molecules, they somehow create ATP because adenine exists, phosphate groups exist. You know, adenine's a very complex, pretty complex molecule. It's a adenine. It's a carbon compound. Any sort of complex carbon compound. That's another thing, because the root of all of this is the formation of carbon compounds.
Mm-hmm.
And carbon compounds being sort of arranged in a certain way.
Yeah.
Just does it, basically.
Yes.
Over loads and loads of time, over a bunch of different lightning strikes happening, or asteroid hitting, Oh, and that's another theory of asteroids bringing life to Earth as well. But
Yeah.
do we have to go into that now?
We can if you want. Okay.
I'm tired.
It is interesting, but yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it's still not enough to question it because we're going to question where
that life
the
came
life
from.
exactly.
Yeah.
So it's not much anyway. So.
But yes.
Yeah.
No, you're right. The key thing we need is this, like, we need the presence of all of these complex structures that are somehow being produced in a chemical everything sludge, and it needs to be somewhere where you have a natural potential of protons, or I don't think it doesn't necessarily have to actually be protons, because electrons are technically doing the job as they jump between the chains and stuff, but you need a natural electric potential gradient for charged particles, which is like this is the part that I find interesting. I don't know why they didn't teach this at school, because if you'd have merged biology, chemistry, and physics and everything into the origin of life, like, you know how sick that is. Anyway.
Yeah.
So, yeah, you're right. We need all of this stuff present. Now, tell me what you know about alkalis and acids, or like just the general overview of alkalis and acid reactions. We're coming to a close. We'll end it after we're done.
Okay,
with this.
acid-alkaline reactions. Yeah, they react to form of salt and water as a neutralization reaction.
Yeah. So, alkali. An acid has a greater number of has excess protons or excess electrons, right?
So the acid donates protons. Yeah.
Yeah. So the acid has an excess. The alkali has a deficiency in electrons. So
Protons and electrons, technically.
Okay, that helps. Protons and electrons. So already, when you have an acid and an alkali together, we already have our potential gradient, right? So if you mix these together, the charged particles will go along the potential gradient, they'll have their neutralization reaction, and then from here, somehow, with the presence of all of these different compounds and whatever shapes you're imagining in your head, there is the potential for the first respiratory reaction to occur, right? With these acids and alkalis. And basically what they talk about in the book is these, like, these underground volcanoes. So you have underground volcanoes where they sort of they spew out, I don't know what it's basically very hot, and like extremophiles and all these different very specialized bacteria live there. But if you think about the early atmosphere, the early atmosphere, there was a lack of oxygen. So that's why you can't, that's why you need some kind of way of creating this without oxygen. But on the early Earth, there are some of these caverns that would spew out acid, basically, and their surroundings would all be alkali. So, and it would be very hot. There's a very concentrated amount, or relatively concentrated amount, of carbon compounds and all these different things that are constituents of bacteria. And this is all a theory, obviously, but I think it's interesting. So you have your acids, you have your alkalis surrounding, and you have your presence of carbon compounds, and then just some random event. An acid atom reacted with an alkali atom. The electron jumped, or the proton went down the potential gradient. It created the first ATP energy storage, and it was like a very sort of like proto-bacteria kind of thing, where it was like it loosely represented a very early form of bacteria. And then this happened again and again, and then you create life.
It's quite interesting because the way it is, if you look at each and every single different process on a surface level, it's very robotic. And all of these robotic processes, when you constitute them together, somehow make up a living thing and can allow more life to be born.
Mm-hmm.
Essentially a bunch of mechanical processes, which is basically what these are. These are all mechanical processes.
Yeah.
All of these bunched up together somehow, like you have a living thing. Now look, you also have mechanisms of even more of this living thing being created from that one living thing.
Yeah.
Right? That's even more complex than itself forming in the first place anyways.
Yeah. Yeah, pretty much.
But this sort of synthesis, the energy storage, the way, I don't know if it's still how it's classified as living, all these different parts of Mrs. Gren, the way it is so robotic that you can't help but think, like, if you were to relate this into computing today, or if you were to...
How does a circuit work? A circuit, you won't have to explain. A circuit has a battery, has a positive and a negative end, your potential gradient. Electrons go around from the negative end, and they're attracted towards the positive
It's
end.
energy storage, yeah, batteries.
Exactly, that's your energy storage, and as the electrons go around, they transfer energy to circuits, to light bulbs, to whatever electrical components, and then that's how computers work.
And it's interesting. That's how computers. That's how robotics work. A robot can excrete heat, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah.
But the only thing, therefore, that separates us and robots is the metaphysics, and it always comes back down to the metaphysics, because that's the only answer that we can think of. Why are robots? Why can't they feel anything? Well, because they're not living. Why they're not living? And our question, and any random person on the street will tell you, oh, they're not conscious. They don't have, you know, the metaphysical components of life. So it's like we sort of solved this to a certain extent, yeah. But what we haven't addressed yet is the metaphysics, and the metaphysics is something that science can't explain yet.
That's true. I mean, that's pretty much, if we go back to the original question, what's the difference between living matter and dead matter? Like, if you consider,
exactly.
Yeah, it's the metaphysical component of it, because in every other aspect, we are essentially just, like you said, we're mechanical processes that are just repeating and repeating. The only thing we think we have over a computer or a table or any collection of atoms is this consciousness that we consider. So, yeah, strange.
I think we can conclude the episode there.
Yeah.
That's a nice way to end.
Yeah, rather than we're helping the death of the universe.
Exactly.
Yeah. Thank you for watching.